how can I invest my money, or where can I put my money to have minimal or no risk to secure my future as I think about my family? So this is a person that's very risk averse.
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer because I will tell you, even putting money in a bank, there's some risk. Even putting money into a financial institution, there is some risk. And risk can be all sorts of things. Risk can be depository risk, where you have insurance that comes into play. You could have stock market risk. You could have interest rate risk. So it's really difficult to answer that question because, again, you need to go back to the bucket that you're concentrating on. And when is the time horizon that you're going to use that money in that bucket? For instance, if you've received $10,000 and you want to use that $10,000 in the next 6 to 8 months, minimizing the risk on that $10,000, you might want to put it into a Power Plus checking or into a CD. But it depends on what your risk tolerance is, when you're going to use the money, and how the rest of your after-tax dollars are invested and your retirement dollars.
Because I think the other point you're making here is that even if you put your money into less risky, I think when you said CDs or checking or savings account, money market account, some of those are defined as less risky. And if you know anything about finance, that means that your return will probably also be lower because somebody's less willing to pay you for the less risk you're willing to take. But in a high inflationary environment,
correct,
there is a risk because if inflation's sitting at 7% and you're earning 2%, you're actually losing 5% by just keeping that money there month over month, year over year. So you do need to factor in the story of your financial life too in here of when do I want to use that money and how much do I need to have available? If you're thinking like, one example here would be like a down payment for a house. I'm going to use it in 5 years. I need to have whatever it is. Let's say it's $20,000. So if I just plop that somewhere, it's actually going to be worth less in 5 years if I'm not earning anything on it.
Yeah. Or maybe do a balance. Maybe do a balance.
Exactly.
Maybe half in a CD and half in an investment account. But again, it goes back to the asset allocation and your risk tolerance. And what else do you have on your balance sheet with regard to the money that you do have?
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. It was exactly what I was going to say it doesn't have to be all or nothing. That's a lot of us think just black and white in this space, like it's got to be all here or all here. And There are a lot of different options. I would say particularly now, you do need to think about your other options. Just because of how high inflation is, there's always been an aspect of that's always been available. But that's where I think looking at what you can do, maybe put it into some different buckets. Heck, it's good for just diversification purposes to have money in different buckets.
Yep.
And it can be a good way to approach it. Okay, another question we got was, does FIRE make sense for Gen X? And if you're not familiar with FIRE, that stands for Financial Independence Retire Early. And that's a movement that's out there. And I think this is somebody asking who's maybe more in their mid-career, trying to figure out, does this make sense to pursue it? So I can take a shot at this one. I think that the beauty of the FIRE movement, what I actually personally love about the FIRE movement is the fact that you are around people who are just very focused on essentially saving a lot of money, reducing their living expenses to speed up that equation to save enough for retirement. So just on principle, those are good principles to follow. Spend less than you make, save a lot of money, invest it for the long run, and you can't really go wrong on that. The short answer to your question, I would say, yes, I think you can for sure continue to pursue it. I do think that the amount of time that you have does play a role in this answer. So if you are a younger person, you tend to have lower living expenses. And then it depends, your income just depends on what that is. But you may have the flexibility to save more just because you haven't worked out in a career as long and you don't have as many expenses. And so it might be easier to do that. Whereas I would guess whoever's asking this maybe has a more established life. Maybe there's a family involved. There might be other expenses that are a baseline level that have to be covered. And it is making it harder to stretch higher on the amount of savings. This could be a little bit more of an adjustment, but I don't think it's ridiculous to say that somebody couldn't get very radical if they wanted to try to, spend a lot less and save a lot more. It just takes a lot of discipline and probably a willingness to make some major life changes for that to happen. Because if you're talking about a house and you're talking about college for kids and you're talking about having kids that live in the home you're paying for, these things all add up pretty quickly. And those aren't easy things just to change. You can't just cut your kids out of the budget. Maybe you want to, but can't cut them out of the budget. You will need to dramatically increase your income, or you're going to need to look at areas where there is an adjustment. And I know people that have done this, like they have sold their expensive house and they've moved into a smaller house on purpose so that they have a lower payment. Or they had 2 cars. Now they're both working from home. They sold one of those cars, and that was a major cost saving. So there are big things that you can do to give yourself that kind of math working in your favor. But I think the further along you go, the more you get used to a lifestyle, it is harder to change that lifestyle. No doubt about it. It's a harder one to shift. This is where I think doing it together with somebody, whether it's a financial expert that can help you or it's another friend that's pursuing this with you, I think you will likely need to have some accountability to help you stick with it. And it's always great to do stuff together, and that can keep you motivated when it gets hard.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Bjorn. There's just a couple things that I might add, and that is life events happen, and life events can sometimes cost money to fix and or to replace income. So you want to be prepared for what possible life events could affect your plan to retire early. The second thing is you don't want to get yourself in a situation where you retire too early, because if you live until 100 and you retire at 50 years of no income coming in until you're 65, and that's Social Security, and not many people have pensions anymore. But that's a long time. That's a long time to have only Social Security coming in and relying on your investments. And you still have those life events that are going to happen. So this gets into also making sure that you have proper health care coverage. Because when you stop working, your health care coverage then has to be funded by yourself versus maybe a corporation helping you, but you might have a spouse who is working for a corporation who can cover you with the healthcare costs. But healthcare costs are an element that needs to be considered.
Yeah, really good points. Definitely the unknowns, how long you're going to live, what are big life events, what are major expenses. We can't always plan for all those. So you've got to be prepared for some of those bigger things that you may not be thinking of right now. Good point.